Hey, everybody. Really sorry for the delay. Trying to walk somebody new through setting this up, but we are here. Thanks so much for joining this Twitter Space AMA with the Kosen Labs team. We've got Miljan Martic, one of the co-founders here, who will be answering your questions. Just pulling them up here again because I always feel the need to close things down when I'm not using them at the time. So anyway, really glad you could all come out. And how many people we got here so far? Oh, a little over a dozen or so. Good stuff. So let's get started. Miljan, can you unmute your mic?
Hey everyone, good to be here. Apologies for being late. I was the one being coached through the spaces.
I wasn't going to out you, but okay.
I know. Thank you, Derek, but I feel the need to admit my failings.
That's okay.
So yeah, let's get this kicked off.
Yeah, let's go. All right, good stuff. We're gonna go to this other view because it's much nicer. Let's start with the basics, obviously. So this question is from M. Havangi on Twitter, and who's also 22828 on Discord. Thanks for your question. When did you guys launch? Like when did you as an organization, as a team, and how did Kosen Labs get started?
Yeah, good question. Thanks for that. So I wanted to give kind of everybody an intro here. So essentially, the idea for Kosen was born, I guess, a couple of years ago when my co-founder Peter and I sort of started thinking about how we can start applying some of the AI techniques that we were using as part of our day-to-day job in DeepMind, and how we can kind of translate that into Web3 space. We were kind of always looking at all kinds of apps coming up in this space and kind of use cases. And in general, even on the blockchain consensus layers, we always used to see interesting problems come up, which we felt could be addressed with machine learning. And so the idea really was that we wanted to create a research lab for AI, so AI research lab, but for specifically focused on Web3, right? And that is a very, very sort of ambitious and hefty goal. So when we kind of zoomed in on it, we said, okay, let's look at something that is more concrete to kind of be our first project, sort of the proving ground, where we can kind of demonstrate both our approach and to see if it actually makes sense. So that's how we kind of kicked off the active LP manager solution that is essentially our first product and that we are currently building. And that has actually been developed over the summer. So we've started speaking about it earlier in the summer, and then Peter was sort of one of the early users of UniV3, and he kind of understood the difficulty of LPing on this kind of new generation of AMMs. So essentially, the solution that he kind of implemented for his own solution and for himself was something that was later transformed into the solution that we are working on today. And really, as a company, I think we were formed around September time when we kind of decided to go out and raised our initial seed round. And yeah, since then we've been kind of really pushing hard on delivering this first version of the product. I know all of you guys are super excited and you kind of want to see it on testnet and play with it. And I'll comment on that in a little bit later. But I think we have some very exciting news for that.
Yeah, terrific, great. And I see Peter has actually joined us here. Peter, thanks for coming on. Peter Van Toth, the other co-founder.
Thank you, Derek. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here.
So you gave a little bit of an intro there, which is really helpful. Clem from our Discord server is hoping for an explanation for people who don't have a technical background on what sort of impact machine learning or artificial intelligence can have on this liquidity pooling.
Yeah, good question, Clem. Thanks. So essentially, I think I want to disambiguate here what essentially AI and machine learning means, right? And when you kind of really zoom in on it, I know this term tends to get thrown quite a lot, and over the last 10 or so years, and in the media in general, people think that AI can be the all-powerful tool or a magical thing. But really, when you zoom down on it, what AI is, it's an optimization method, right? And it's a essentially a mathematical approach to optimizing certain problems. You can define those problems however you want, but usually you would define something called an objective function, which is essentially, in the name itself, it means what objective do you want to achieve. And if you can express things mathematically, then you can run optimization on top of it. And what machine learning techniques tend to give you is essentially a very good solution, either a kind of the most optimal solution in some cases, and in some cases, a solution that is still good enough, right? So when you look at problems in that lens, you can sort of find these optimization problems everywhere, not just in this particular problem of LPing, but in general, in kinds of, predicting the future prices, optimizing routing through different dexes, optimizing routing on the kind of node level and sending packages, kind of doing this LP yields and optimizing that. Basically, everywhere where you need to kind of figure out a certain set of parameters, given some data, you can use these techniques, right? And kind of going back to your original question, Clem, in terms of how this can help with the LP problem, really what you're doing in liquidity pooling is you need to determine a set of parameters, right? And these parameters are, what range do you want to LP in, and what sort of liquidity you want to deploy, and how you want to kind of move these parameters around. And if things were static, if you could just say, okay, here's my setup, and I'm going to LP, as the case was in UniV2, actually. In UniV2, you would only give your kind of one range that was possible, and you would LP, right? There was nothing else to kind of determine. But in this new version of liquidity pooling in Uniswap v3, the problem is much more difficult, because as the price moves, the parameters that you need to select also move. So it's a dynamic problem. And essentially what we are trying to do with machine learning and AI is to make it so easy for you that you don't have to think about it. You can just essentially be, again, a passive liquidity provider in the same way as you did in Uniswap v2, without having to think about how to optimize these parameters. And we have the software and the AI to actually do that for you.
Fantastic. Great. That was a nice detailed answer. Hopefully that helps people without a technical background. And to a certain extent, at least with AI, I'm kind of in that position of knowing just enough to be dangerous. I knew about this concept of setting an objective, and having the machine learning model figure out how to reach that objective. But that was a really good explanation. Thanks for going deep, but also shallow at the same time. So overall, Zach Venta wanted to know, what is the vision? And also if you could talk a little bit about the differences between Kosen Labs and other similar but different projects like Fetch AI, Singularity, BitTensor, and Piano Crocodile also brought up Visor Finance as again, as a similar but different project.
Yeah. Cool. So let me start off by giving you essentially the vision for Kosen Labs, right? As I actually mentioned at the beginning, we set out to create an AI research lab specifically focused on Web3 and the kind of decentralized economy space, right? And what that means is that we want to set up a lab where machine learning people can come, and not just machine learning people, of course, but also all kinds of engineers and other people who want to work on products. But really, the idea is that we want to be creating products that utilize machine learning and AI in some way, and solve problems in the Web3 space, and kind of help people and unlock a lot of value and create useful sort of products through that, right? And in order to do that, what you first need to do is you need to identify some of these problems, and then you can kind of decide how you want to deploy your solutions, right? And what these other projects that are mentioned, such as Fetch AI, SingularityNet, and BitTensor, what they have in common is that they are essentially an infrastructure level project, right? And that is very, very different from Kosen, which is we are essentially a product-oriented company, product level company. So let me just kind of clarify what I mean by that. So in the case of Fetch AI and both SingularityNet and BitTensor, actually, what they allow you to do is you create a machine learning model that you can kind of connect to their network or run on their blockchain, and that allows you to maybe even get paid for some of the kind of services that you develop and kind of models that you deploy. But really, they are generalized layers and the generalized blockchains where people can deploy some of these models. I mean, they're not necessarily deployed on chain; they're usually deployed off chain, but they essentially allow people to connect and use these models and get some kind of tokenized compensation in some cases, and so on, right? So whereas what we are trying to do is a little bit different. What we are trying to do is we say, okay, here's a specific problem in the space. So in our case, for example, the first problem that we want to solve is this kind of active liquidity management on UniV3. And then once you identify the problem, then you say, okay, we want to make a sort of infrastructure part for that will allow us to solve that problem. And in our case, that is the kind of Kosen protocol, which will enable us as well as other people to kind of connect and deploy their ML strategies. But what we are really doing is we are essentially just building a small infrastructure part specifically for that problem, right? What we really want to focus on is the kind of quality of the solution that we provide and quality of the sort of strategies and product that we as Kosen Labs can provide, because that is where our sort of edge lies, and our background really has been in sort of machine learning and research. So that's what we want to deliver. We're not so much focused on the infrastructure layer, but we definitely need some parts of the infrastructure in order to allow us to kind of deploy the solutions that we have. And then kind of looking, more into the future, once we kind of see some other problems that we think, machine learning can actually help a lot here and it can solve some of these problems, we will do the same thing again, right? We will not try to build a very generalized kind of infrastructure platform, but we will just focus on whatever is needed for a particular problem that we want to solve.
Awesome, good stuff.
Yeah,
looking forward to it.
I think that's so. I think I answered one of the questions, but the second one regarding to Visor. So I think that one is definitely more relevant. So I would say Visor, Charm, Popsicle. Those are the kind of projects / product oriented solutions that are quite similar to what we are doing in some sense, and because they're also essentially providing a active liquidity management strategies to this problem, to the problem of UniV3 LPing. And I would say, the difference and the way that we kind of think about it really is the strategies that we are providing are much more sort of dynamic and AI ML based. And I think right now it's kind of hard. I mean, we can of course talk about it and we can say, our strategies do this and that, but I think the best way to kind of show people what the difference between the strategies that we will be utilizing and the strategies that are currently on the market is to essentially let people try out the protocol. And, once we release in kind of early alpha and early beta, I think people will see that it is quite a bit different, especially because we think both the mitigation of the impermanent loss that you get by using these strategies will be meaningful, as well as the yields that you can get by utilizing some of these strategies. Especially because they're essentially predictive strategies. They are not reactive in a sense that they will not look at just kind of the past data and decide what is the sort of realized volatility and then kind of extrapolate that into the future. But they will look at some other more kind of nuanced factors and try to really predict where the price will move. And from that point onwards, it should essentially give you a better performance in the end.
Perfect. Good stuff. Good. I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this properly. Idena from our Discord says, at present, swap competition is fierce. The overall situation and technical details of Uniswap v3 are not clear. I'm an LP on Uniswap v3 for one pair, and I was like, you know what? Just default. I'm just going to use default. Just go. What unique, anything you haven't mentioned already? What unique innovations does Kosen Labs have? In addition to that, actually, I think you've already covered that really clear. So maybe we'll skip on to the next part. Aggregation protocols and combined products have always faced the risk of a lightning loan attack. Is there anything Kosen Labs can do to avoid that risk?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a good question. It's essentially the flash loan attack is attacks are generally a problem in the space. To my knowledge, I don't think the kind of liquidity, sort of the LP active managers have had a problem so far. I know there was recently some small issues with kind of visor pools that they had, but I think they've kind of caught that on quite quickly. And essentially, there are some pretty kind of formal best practices at least in the kind of LP space, in terms of how you design your vaults in order to avoid these kind of attacks. So I think primarily, Visor, they spoke about this where, you allow essentially only certain amounts of deposits and withdrawals, and you only allow a certain ratio to be deposits in certain ratios and so on. So I think, if you kind of take those things into account, you can drastically mitigate any possibilities of this happening on the kind of protocol level that we are implementing. But of course, it's always the biggest danger really in blockchain is this kind of combinatorial nature. It is also the biggest benefit, but also the danger in terms of security is the combinatorial nature of the blockchain itself. And I would say like one thing that is very interesting to us is, how can we be LPs in this kind of long tail of assets that don't really have massive liquidity? Because I don't think flash loan attacks tend to be really problematic in pools that have massive volume and that are kind of quite well utilized during the day. But I think this kind of long tail of assets where you really want to be providing liquidity, because in many of those cases maybe people are actually swapping quite a lot and there's just not a lot of liquidity. But there's always a danger in kind of suffering this flash loan attack if the liquidity is insufficient and if some of these other parameters are not really as they should be. So I think that's like an open research question for us, and it's definitely something that we are looking at, because we think that some of these automated methods and kind of algorithmic market making methods, as we like to think of it, we think that these methods can be quite useful in deploying on, not just like top 10 vaults, but really on hundreds of different vaults in quite a scalable way. Depending on the parameters of the underlying, which is the Uniswap vaults. But I think, as I said, it's the open question of how do you make sure that all of the vaults that you deploy on are secure enough, and especially these kind of low liquidity ones.
Good stuff. Good answer. I appreciate the honesty. Still some work to do there on the research end, but that's great. CWalk probably had some of the most detailed questions submitted. So I think we'll try to get through all of them. We're only about 20 minutes into this, so I think we've got time. You've got these machine learning models, obviously, quite a bit of experience already working in the space, being an LP, as Peter started off. How is Kosen, or I guess the ML models, how are they calculating implied volatility when the options market is so nascent in DeFi?
Mm-hmm. Good question, CWalk, definitely. I think so, but this question essentially, I think what it assumes is that the options framework that a few people on Twitter have been kind of popularizing, I think it assumes that this is the right sort of framework of addressing the question of like what is the optimal sort of LP positions and how to LP. We don't really think that is necessarily the case, and if that is not the case, then it is not necessary to use the options market and to kind of get or calculate implied volatility from the options themselves. What you can do is essentially you can calculate your risk in a number of different ways. Options is essentially kind of the reverse way, when you let the options price the risk and then you take it out of those options. But as you say, the options market is very nascent, so we have our own ways of calculating that risk.
Good stuff. CWalk's next question was about how Kosen is looking to adjust lower and upper bounds as implied volatility increases.
Yeah, so I think that essentially ties in with some of the stuff that I discussed previously, where when we are using, I mean, really, this is the core of our value add, I think, and the offering that we are trying to create, which is that we're developing algorithms that are very adaptable and that are very robust to these kind of moves. So for us, actually, that was really the primary thing that we wanted to solve, was to say, okay, let's say we have some kind of predictions about where the price will move, and where the risk will move, and how the volatility will look like in the future. How can we kind of make sure that we are really robust if we assume that what we are predicting here is not good? So you would kind of take this adversarial approach of saying, okay, I have some predictions, but really I'm not sure how accurate this is. So let me like kind of count for the worst case scenario, right? And based off of that, I think that's essentially how we would be applying this sort of lower and upper bounds. Is that the method itself will be deciding how they're applied, but the method itself is designed to be as robust as possible, regardless of the kind of market conditions.
Cool, good. And one more from Seawalk to wrap that up. What about I imagine you're in your research, you're simulating slippage in when testing LP positions.
So currently we are not really looking so much into slippage, specifically because we are essentially developing the strategy for some of the top pairs, and currently in the space where we would be operating. Our plan to launch is essentially with go through a guarded launch where we have limits on the deposits and the size of these vaults, and essentially the sizes that we will be operating with for the first couple of months is pretty negligible, given the volume and the size of these Uniswap pools. But that is definitely something that we are planning to add to our simulator and to start incorporating a lot more. We've in the past used and had experience ourselves with some kind of market making models that people tend to use in the finance industry, and we are aware of this kind of dynamic slippage models that people use. But I think for the moment we thought it was not very necessary to kind of overcomplicate things too much.
Cool, fair enough. Okay, good. So I'm going to take a minute here just to say we will be distributing a proof of attendance protocol badge, a POAP badge. After the next question, you're going to need the mobile app. So whether you have an iPhone or an Android phone, I imagine you're using one of the other to listen here. And if you're not, it means you're using your laptop or your desktop, and therefore your phone should be free and available to go download the app. So head over to the App Store, the Play Store, type in POAP. Find the POAP wallet mobile app. I can't remember what it's called right now. And if you don't have it already, because after the next question, I'm going to give you the secret word that you need to use in order to mint it. And I'll say it nice and clear so everybody has a chance to go on and get it. Anyway, moving on to the next question. ZW Chen 740, also from our Discord, of course, wants to know the most important question of the day. When can we expect some sort of alpha product or testnet dApp to play around with?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, and I think everyone was asking about that one on the Discord for the last few weeks.
Yeah.
I think so. So just to kind of preface that, the reason why we couldn't give you guys an answer is because we are still sort of in the development phase, and I didn't want to give you guys like we're launching on this and this date, and then it kind of like overruns, because that's how it usually goes with engineering. These deadlines tend to get kind of moved around a little bit. So we didn't have an exact date, and we still don't have one. But Q1 next year is essentially what we are targeting. I would say somewhere around February, but don't hold me to that.
Okay. All right. So that's the hope, but no promises.
That is definitely the hope. I mean, of course, we want to launch as soon as possible, but also we are very careful about kind of engineering these things properly, and we don't want to rush it. I don't think there's a need to rush it, because we think we have a very good product, and it doesn't matter if we launch 1 month sooner or 1 month later. I think we just want to make sure that it is done right, and that then we can have confidence in what we launch.
Yeah, this is really not the sort of thing you can mess up.
Yeah, no. Well, I don't know. It depends who you ask. It seems that there's a lot of projects in blockchain that don't hold that opinion, but yeah, we definitely do.
Yeah, well, I mean, I will say in defense of just about everybody who builds Web3 products, I've seen teams who said we're going to launch August 2021. It's December, and they're just launching like a test net now. So inevitably, for especially for people who are just coming from Web 2.0 to Web 3, things take a lot longer than most people think they do. And there's a variety of reasons why that happens, but yeah, I think hedging your bets and saying sometime in Q1 is probably the best. February we hope, but yeah, hope.
That's right. That's right. And I think it's important to stress, the difference between Web 2 and Web 3 is really in the security mindset, because, smart contracts are not easy to change, if even, and, we need to be sure that what we are kind of putting out there makes sense, and that it is following the best practices, that it has been audited, and really looked over by some more senior people. So of course, even for us, it takes some time to kind of find good Solidity developers that we want to work with. So that's obviously been a very scarce resource in the last year or so. So bear with us.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, the ability to be a liquidity provider on these platforms is not going away anytime soon. So ultimately, I think we have a fairly long time frame.
Actually, I did want to say another thing, which I don't think anybody really asked, but I think it'll be very interesting to the community. Is I think the vision that we had for sort of, now that you mentioned it, you reminded me, how LP will kind of look in the future, and how this whole space of people LPing and the kind of AMMs will look like. And I think we have a very sort of interesting view on that, is that, I think Web 3.0 people kind of look at it as internet of value, right? They refer to it as internet of value. And what essentially that means is that a lot of the assets are getting tokenized, and a lot more will be in the future. We're essentially in this point where we have some kind of hyper financialization of many things, tweets, thoughts, game objects, NFTs, like all kinds of stuff is getting tokenized. And essentially what you really need is, if you want to put value onto something, you need that thing to be tradable. And for something to be tradable, you need to make a market for it, right? And the kind of most convenient, most Web3 native way of making a market is through a DEX, right? Through an AMM. And that's why we really think that this is going to be a big thing in the future. I don't think LPing is going anywhere. Actually, I think it's going to become like 10x more than what it is today, because there's going to be this very, very long tail of assets, of all kinds of tokens and assets, that will be traded on AMMs. And on the trading side, on the actual LP side, you will need people who will want to be liquidity providers, right? And I think that's where we can sort of slot in with this product, to allow people to essentially not think too much about how they LP, just be able to kind of do it in a passive way and really get exposure to this asset class, which so far has only really been available to big hedge funds. In traditional finance, market makers can only be big hedge funds and institutions, not retail. So I think that's a really interesting sort of switch in Web3, when anyone can be a market maker.
Yeah, for sure. That LP position I mentioned earlier it's actually done fairly well. But having somebody else help me decide, where to go and where to set that price range essentially and stuff like that would obviously be really helpful. Okay, Hoyt Infinity from our Discord server said Kosen's lab mission is to bring AI into the decentralized economy. I think there's a quote from the website. We will provide the best solution for AMM liquidity. So, okay, no, sorry, one sec. Okay, so obviously we want to provide a great solution for AMM liquidity. Ultimately, this question comes down to security. They have an assertion here that artificial intelligence, I guess machine learning models, can be hacked, destroyed. Maybe a better way to put that is fed bad data from somewhere. What sort of precautions are you guys taking into account when it comes to I guess the security of the machine learning models and any smart contracts obviously that are deployed.
Yeah, that is definitely a valid concern. As I said, I think security is definitely at the forefront of our thinking, and both in the kind of engineering of smart contracts. But I think this question more kind of zooms in on the AI part of things, and you're totally right. Kind of garbage in, garbage out, and it's very important to make sure that the kind of price feeds and all of the data that is going into your model is up to a standard, and it's not being manipulated. So, we, for all the data that we kind of take, we try, or actually we don't try, we definitely make sure that we never rely on like a single data source that can kind of cause a single point of failure, right? So, for example, for prices, that would essentially mean getting a feed from like 5 different exchanges, right? And then getting like a weighted or a combined feed. So in the same sense that, exchanges like BitMEX and so on, they have their own kind of price feed for determining the mark price. We're using something very similar to that. All other kinds of data and types of data that we're using is also kind of being scrutinized and verified in that sense. And we have also parts of the code that kind of check for these outliers and make sure that nothing wonky is going on there. And then I guess the last part of it is the one that I already mentioned, is that when we are kind of designing the strategies, we are really thinking and we are really using the AI techniques that kind of assume the worst. They assume that the predictions are not good and that things can actually go bad. So that adds essentially an extra layer of security that should be essentially covering these kind of problems.
To that extent, I don't know if every time this happened, it was this one protocol's fault, but we saw some issues with CoinMarketCap earlier this week, and at least one of the causes of Tether suddenly being worth thousands of dollars or millions of dollars, which is obviously not like each coin or each token, was because of bad data being fed into the Chainlink network. And I'm not trying to poop on Chainlink here. Things happen, but are you guys also taking into account like any redundancies when it comes to any oracles or any other data feeds?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's super important. And as I said, I think having data feeds from a number of exchanges, if you use like Bitfinex and then Bitcoin, Binance and Coinbase, like if you're getting like a price feed from 3 different places, it's highly unlikely that all of them will essentially do something crazy, right? And then if in your data you're getting all of a sudden you're getting numbers that are like 1 million times greater, your sort of outlier detection system should very easily flag that and like stop the algorithm, stop the trading, and just kind of flag it for people to actually have a look at it. So we do have a kill switch that is essentially there to do just that, to prevent any kind of weird and wonky things from happening.
Cool. Perfect. Great. Thanks so much. Okay, I'm going to take a moment here to talk about the POAP badge again. The secret word, get your mobile app out and running, hit the mint button, tap secret word, and you want to type in Kosen Labs 17 DEC, all together. KOSEN LABS 17 DEC. Oh, and looks like it's it's case sensitive. All right, capital K OSEN Labs. There we go. 17 capital D on the first little bit of December. And that's not working. Okay, sorry. BFA, I know you're listening. Can you go check that, please? This the secret is not found. So my apologies, guys. We'll get that fixed up shortly. Okay,
yeah,
back to the questions.
I've been trying to mint it myself,
Oh, okay.
I gotta get myself a POAP.
Of course, yeah, of course. We're here. We're hosting. We want the POAP too.
We want the POAPs. That's right.
Moonsun from our Discord wants to know, as a community member without a tech research or development background, how do we help? And this is also a question that lots of other people have been asking, like, how do we help the project? Is there going to be an ambassador program, etc.? What at this point, what do you have to say to those folks?
Yeah, I have to say thanks for staying with us, guys. I think I know that when there's something interesting they want to check out and there's just simply not enough like resources and things to do. I know it can be frustrating, but I think what I would say to this is we're definitely planning to have a lot more engagement with our community. And we currently, in the last couple of months, we really had our heads down working on the product. But as we are kind of coming closer to the alpha launch, I think we're going to be doing a couple of things. So we are planning to have an ambassadorship program, and we'll be publishing a little bit more details about that next week, I think. And then we're also, in the sort of earlier phases before we launch, we'll have a test net where people can kind of try things out, give us some feedback. We would very much appreciate that. And I think, those will be some of the kind of initial ways people can get involved. And then down the line, I think we'll have a lot more things going on.
Good stuff. So now you all know something's coming. Okay, we have a little bit more time here, so we're going to keep going. Linux, I'm not sure. Linux.eth from our Discord wants to know, first of all, wants to say they're really excited about the vision. They are an ML engineer and really happy to witness the combination of ML technology and blockchain. Question, where will the trained model be stored? To my knowledge, deep learning models are deployed, or if deep learning models are deployed, the huge parameters would be a problem for an on-chain app. So blockchain storage is typically not cheap. So yeah, I think that's a great question. Love to hear your response on that.
That is a great question. And I think you're totally right. Storing deep learning models or really any kind of high parameter kind of models on the blockchain is currently not a viable solution, but I think there's a lot of things to unpack there. So if we're talking about storing this in let's say Ethereum, then that is definitely a no-go. I think there are other chains that are currently maybe out there, places like Dfinity and so on, that have a lot more of this kind of available storage and potential for running even maybe some more interesting and serious level compute on chain. But currently, the answer to this question is that it is not really possible to deploy any kind of machine learning models in a private way on chain, right? And I say private, that is the kind of key part, is that in a lot of cases when people are developing machine learning models, in some cases the data might be private, right? And you don't want to kind of even expose some of these parameters simply because people can reverse engineer some of the data and some of the kind of private information from the models themselves, right? So I think in general for the machine learning community and blockchain community to be able to deploy actual machine learning models on chain, we need to kind of figure out first, how do we solve the storage problem that you kind of alluded to? Then how do we solve the inference problem if we want to actually be running these models on chain? And lastly, but definitely not the least, is how do we do this in a private way? So I think there are some promising solutions and proposals that I've kind of seen, and they all seem to involve ZK tech. And honestly, I think this is something that's going to be possible within the next 1 or 2 years. This is something that we've kind of been closely following, and which is actually why one of our early advisors and partners has been Protocol Labs, because they've been looking into something like this on the kind of infrastructure level. I think the future is going to be super exciting. So currently, of course, these models are not deployed on chain, but I think this is also a sort of a testing ground for us to see how far we can kind of think of this and where we can push it, and then in the future, hopefully, we can actually get some of this stuff deployed on chain as well.
Awesome. And about the POAP, worst case scenario, I've taken a screenshot of everybody listening right now, just 30 seconds ago. So as a worst case scenario, we'll send it to you directly, probably from myself or Biodun Ayurinde.eth, who's also listening here. We both part of the community team here, so we'll get you your POAP. I promise. It just might not be the secret word if we can't get this working before the end of the
If
session.
Derek doesn't get you the POAP, talk to me. I'll chase Derek.
Oh, there you go. That sounds like a threat.
No. It's
No,
serious thing, man. POAPs, you know.
No, absolutely. I've collected quite a few this year. I'm not stopping yet, but still got 13, 14 days.
There you go.
Cool. Silhouette from our Discord wants to know, is there a technical difference between a blockchain-based AI and a traditional AI, or are we just applying the same technology to a different thing?
Yeah, I would say it is the latter. It really is it is the same technology. It's just the way you apply it and I guess the problems that you apply it to. But I think the methodology itself is well, the same really. I think some of the challenges of kind of applying this to the blockchain side of things is I guess the questions that I just talked about. So, do you want to run this off chain and on chain? And I think that it's a good discussion to have, and there's pros and cons, I think, to both of those. If you do decide to run it on chain, then how do you kind of run it? And maybe running some of these algorithms on chain will require different sort of modes of operation and different ways of implementing and parallelizing them. But I think the mathematical sort of underpinnings of it and the algorithms themselves are pretty much the same thing.
Cool. Fair enough. I figured as much, but I thought for some people they might also be interested. White Riddell, I know you're listening because you messaged me earlier. We already asked about the testnet, or Milian already addressed when the testnet might be available, which will be hopefully sometime in Q1. So I'm just going to skip over that, but I will acknowledge that you asked. To Fire from our Discord, how do you keep model robustness if the parameters change dramatically when the state of the market changes? I think you probably already addressed this a little bit earlier, but if you have anything else to say.
Yeah. Basically, I think that was already covered. We essentially are tracking the state of the market. The model is essentially retrained all the time. So I think that essentially allows us to adapt for any kind of changes in the market regimes. And then, just kind of adding all the stuff that I already mentioned about robustness sort of takes care of the rest.
Perfect. Sorry if you're hearing little buzzing noises. I've left my mic on, and there's a Telegram group that's getting spammed that I follow. Dimitro has a question not everybody's comfortable talking about, but I think you've already kind of addressed some of this. But if we could talk about it in a little bit more detail. My goodness, I'm sorry, I'm tripping over my words here. Are there, what sort of weaknesses or potential weaknesses are there at the moment, and and where you're looking to improve to help ensure that this works as best as possible?
Yeah, I would say probably basically the things that we already touched upon. Really, security has been sort of back in front of our mind for now, and this also applies to both the kind of smart contract side security and sort of how we think about structuring the sort of data feeds that feed into the smart contracts, how we kind of design the solution around that, how we design things around people depositing their assets, people taking out their assets. So that's always a challenge, and it's something that we're looking at closely. And then the other thing, of course, the security of the AI. So I think we already kind of touched quite a bit on that point. Something that I guess the question is like what we would want to do more of things to kind of improve the security and to make this project safer. I think we're really doing all we kind of can at the moment. I think it will be very interesting to see what people think about that when the product launches and how safe they feel depositing their assets. Kind of in the long term, there's challenges that are kind of structural to the whole crypto market, right? What that would involve is basically pure speculation, I would say, but we might end up seeing in the future things like increased regulation really threaten the kind of whole AMM setup that we currently have. We can see some potentially maybe like big exploits in some of these AMMs or kind of bad design decisions that were kind of taken in some of these major protocols that would affect essentially everybody who is building on top of the stack. So people like us and all the other active liquidity managers. So those are some of the things that worry me sometimes. But honestly, there's not much we can do from our side. What we can do is essentially build the product that we control and that we are building the best way we can. Make sure to kind of put the security best practices there, and then hope that we're all going to make it in the end.
Awesome. Yeah, I know I'm going to make it because I went to Figment's WAGME party in Paris during Ethereum Community Conference in July. So if you were at the party, you're going to make it. I think that's how that works, right?
Fair enough. I think we'll have to make a Kosen party, and it's going to be Kosen WAGME. So
yeah,
definitely.
I'll see you in Paris in July.
Sounds good.
I'm planning. I want to go. Paris was a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. I think we'll be there as well.
Perfect. Final question. Well, we've got a little bit of time, so we might open it up to everybody here listening right now to see if there's any other questions that haven't been asked. I think we've got a really good coverage here, though. Ridgeway wants to know. Well, it said that they like Framework Ventures very much, and wanted to know why you think, or maybe why, or if Framework told you why they invested in Kosen Labs.
Yeah, they did actually. So it's an interesting story. No, I think we really liked Framework from the kind of very beginning. So Vance was the person we spoke to, and that was kind of the partner that was leading the whole investment round for us. I think Vance is a brilliant guy. He really understands sort of the vision that we have and the vision that we're kind of building towards. Because what we are essentially are building is not just one thing. It's not just one product. It really is going to be a set of kind of AI products and AI services that are going to really touch, many different aspects of the kind of Web3 space, or at least we hope. And he definitely sees the potential of applying AI and ML solutions to some of the problems that we've kind of talked to him about. We generally think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in this space to apply these techniques, and I think Vance kind of sees even further than that. He sees something that we used to refer to as DIOs, decentralized autonomously intelligent organizations, which was a bit of a wordplay, but it essentially boils down to the fact that we think in the future when we have this kind of massive interconnected blockchain network, not just of like one blockchain, but of kind of multi-chain world, and many kind of dApps working together and being composable in many different ways. You will also have this whole sort of intelligence layer. So currently, Ethereum and similar EVM-based blockchains are the kind of execution layer. Your, I would say, heuristic layer is how we call it, because you can program it to say, if X then Y. So that is very heuristic. It is deterministic in some sense. It is defined what the order of execution is. But I think the next sort of level of evolution in this whole space is really adding this intelligence layer, right? And what I mean by that is this whole kind of ecosystem of intelligent agents, AI services, performing all kinds of things on the blockchain. Whether they're kind of optimizing your LP positions on Uniswap, whether they are kind of finding you the best yields in kind of different yield farms or across chains, whether they're allowing you to get the best price for your trades on 1inch or Uniswap, and so on. So I think there's essentially a whole sort of space there that will be developed in the future that will sort of drive the progress, and the progress of Web3, right? And it is sort of very similar to how this happened in Web 2. So 2000 to 2010, a lot of it was driven by mobile, right? A lot, like the web was driven, Web 2 was driven by mobile adoption and the social networks and all of the stuff that was developing around that, like the app economy, right? And then I think the growth of a lot of these kind of Web2 companies from 2010 to 2020 was primarily driven by kind of utilizing this intelligence layer that I just spoke about. And in the kind of Web2 space, that looks very different than the way it would look in the kind of Web3 space, because in Web2 it's all about, this kind of centralized services that are being run by these big companies, big tech companies, inside their silos. And if you want to access these kind of smart services and smart email composers and all of that stuff, you have to use Gmail, and you have to use some of these other services if you want access to the AI. Whereas in Web3, we kind of think that this is going to be very different. It's going to be, as Web3 itself is kind of based on these open principles, we think these services will easily be accessible to anyone. And we want essentially to be a part of it. We want Kosen to be a provider for some of these services and to kind of deliver the best solutions for the problems that we think are very cool and interesting.
Perfect. Okay, we've got time, I think, to answer one or two more questions. If anybody here in this Twitter space now somehow, some way has a question that we haven't asked already. So if you do, please request to speak. I'll give you guys about 20 seconds here, because any more dead air than that, and I think, things just start to drag on. So if you have a question you want to ask, please do. I don't think we got the POAP secret word working properly, unfortunately, but I took another set of screenshots after, and somebody will reach out to you with a Twitter DM or a Discord DM if we have your Discord username, and get you the code that way. And looks like we're good. Okay. Miljan, Peter, thank you so much for spending some time with us and the rest of the community here today. Really appreciate your insight. This is recorded. It's going to go up on some sort of platform in the very near future. I don't know if we have a Twitter or a YouTube account yet, or library or anything like that, but we'll get one set up if not, and make sure we have a repository for this sort of thing. So thanks a lot, and
awesome. Thanks so much, Derek. Thanks so much, and thanks so much for all of you guys and all of your questions. This was really cool, and we're hoping to do one soon again.
Yeah, probably next month. Everybody needs a break over Christmas or whatever other holiday you celebrate. Yeah,
terrific. Sounds good.
All right, everybody have a great weekend. Thanks for tuning in.